Hey there, Virgin Nation. Matt here, and I'm super excited because today I have an interview that is very special to share with you. T.A. McCann, founder of several tech companies, including Gist, which sold to BlackBerry, and Rival IQ, which is actually one of my favorite softwares right now. I hopped on a Skype call with T.A. yesterday and had just a phenomenal conversation. He has done it all. I mean, he's started successful companies, he started companies and failed, and he's not afraid to share what he learned along the way. He's also won 2 America's Cups because he's an expert sailor, and we even talk about some of the parallels between sailing and business. Just all around fascinating conversation. Check out this interview. But TA, I really appreciate you being here today, and we had a really great conversation out in Vegas. You clearly have tons of experience with all of your different ventures. Some succeeded wildly and got acquired. Some not so much, like most entrepreneurs. There have been failures along the way. So I'm hoping that you can give us a little bit of insight. First off, how did you get into entrepreneurship? When did you first get that entrepreneurial bug?
Around 12.
Around 12. What were you doing at age 12?
I had my own grass cutting and yard work business, and I recently found a business card that I made in printing class on a real hand printing press by setting my own type in middle school.
Wow.
And so that was my sort of first company, and then I started another company when I was sort of 15, which was all around boat maintenance. So I lived near northern Indiana on Lake Michigan, and so I did a lot of that. And so I think I got the entrepreneurial bug very, very early. Yeah. And the feeling of independence and the feeling of being able to sort of control my own destiny is something that's always been important to me. And so long time.
And so that first venture-backed company that you started, was that back in 1999?
Yeah, I graduated from Purdue, as we share sort of a Midwestern sort of roots. Grew up in northern Indiana, yeah. Graduated from Purdue, was a mechanical engineer. Quit to go sailing for a long time. So I spent really sort of the mid-90s all as a professional sailor. So I'm out of the technology space for the most part. And then the internet started.
You were pretty successful at that too, weren't you?
Yeah, I'd say I was successful at the sailing component.
Yeah.
And you know, the internet was happening, and I was hanging around, sort of starting to be a little bit bored with sailing, a little bit more getting back interested in technology. And so I started my first real technology company. It was a web development company, and so I built a lot of the early sites in the marine industry. So I built all kinds of different things that were around my friends there, and some data-driven websites and active server pages and all this stuff that many of your audience will never even hear about. But that was sort of the mid to late 90s, sort of 95, 96, 97. And then the ideas for my first, I would say, real software startup came in those sort of time frames. So my first wasn't even venture backed. It was really only angel funded. We started that in 1998.
So prior to that, it sounds like you had a lot of experience prior to your technology startup on the open waters. And that's something that I've become a lot more interested in. Obviously, we don't have a lot of great sailing areas here in Indiana, but it's something that I've found a lot of the people in the startup community have actually had a similar background of doing some sailing. I actually just finished Ted Turner's autobiography as well. Right. And so it's interesting to hear some of the parallels between that particular sport and entrepreneurship, whether it's in technology or not. Were there any lessons that you learned while you were competing that you feel carried over?
So I've got a couple of blog posts. I wrote one which was how winning the America's Cup is like doing a successful startup.
I saw that.
So now I've actually done both of those. It's kind of nice to do that. And funny enough, I wrote that sort of inspired by Larry Ellison and the Oracle team winning the last America's Cup. And so I was one of the first guys to get Larry into professional sailing. So he hired me and 5 other guys off of the 95 America's Cup team to get him into sailing, and we went on to win 5 world championships for Larry. And then from there, he wanted to step up to the biggest game in sailing, which is really the America's Cup. And so, you know, a couple $300 million later, he's got the America's Cup in San Francisco and winning that. But I'd say the lessons that I learned there, and these are more detailed in the blog post, is that you have to have this sort of certain hypothesis on the areas where you want to innovate. And in sailing, it could be the sail design or the boat design or the crew or all of that. The more money you have, the more different areas you can experiment in. So you can run many different experiments at the same time. That once you have a hypothesis, you go try to hire the best engineers you can. And if you can hire those engineers ahead of your competition, then you can gain an advantage. And then you have to figure out how to align all those different experiments so that you don't get overly confused in one category or another, and line them up from a timeline perspective. And in the case of the America's Cup or any kind of real sort of competitive situation, you oftentimes have a sort of a timeline. Yeah. When is the thing going to happen? And in the startup, the parallels to startup is, when am I going to run out of money, or when do I have to raise more money? What are the things I think I need to achieve by that time? How do I measure those? Where are the experiments I'm going to run, and how long do I need to run that experiment to figure out whether I keep running an experiment in that category, or I just call that category off, or that category becomes my competitive advantage. And those things I think are very similar between sort of, I'd say, sophisticated sailboat racing and software startups.
Were you ever on a boat at a time when you felt like quitting might be the best decision?
Well, there were a few times when it was dangerous, really dangerous. So we were involved in the Sydney Hobart race where I think 7 people died. Wow. That was the second most deadly sailboat race ever, and I was on Oracle, or sorry, Sayonara with Larry Ellison and a bunch of guys, and we in that case probably had the best team on the water. We had all pros, lots of experience, and it was really very challenging for us and quite dangerous. There's other times I was doing the Around the World race, and we had the race effectively wrapped up. We had created a huge advantage, and the mast fell down. And that, at the moment, sort of once we got the boat back to safe, where we weren't going to sink, I'd say almost everyone on the team said, okay, I want to quit. Like, I'm done. Like, because we were going to win and we didn't get to win. And so let's just pack it up and go home. And it took us about 3 days to go from where the mast fell down to actually getting to land. We were fortunate that it was only that far. I mean, the skipper of the boat and all of us sort of went through this transformation of wanting to quit and give up and go home to finding something we could salvage. For example, could we still win the last leg? Could we be the top of the bottom pack, as it were? Could we satisfy our sponsors? Could we do a lot of things and could we achieve our own personal goals of actually completing Around the World sailboat race? And so all of those things kind of went through our minds, and slowly but surely the team made this, sort of 180-degree turn to be really enthused about how do we go and achieve those things. So it's sort of a resetting of the goalpost as you were. And then we were all really enthused, and we in fact did go on and win the last leg quite convincingly and achieve many of those sort of goals.
That's amazing. I've seen that so many times in different ventures, and I'm wondering if you took that same strategy during your first internet venture when you were doing HelpShare.
Well, I mean, HelpShare, I was inexperienced. I didn't really know what I was doing very much, and in many different categories. We didn't really know what we were building. We didn't know how to build it. We certainly didn't know how to raise money very well. We were sitting in sort of this point in time when, the real first big wave of the internet was happening. I mean, it was 98, 99, 2000. I mean, it was incredible. And to be inexperienced in that point in time, and in some ways it has parallels to where we are sort of today. To see the kinds of things like an Uber or an Airbnb or a Snapchat or a WhatsApp. I mean, companies like that going from nothing to being worth, billions of dollars relatively short period of time. You had this sort of sense as a first-time entrepreneur, like, wow, what am I doing right and what am I doing wrong? At least I'm happy to be in the space. At least I'm happy to be trying to innovate. And for us, I think in HelpShare's case, I think the idea was a reasonably good idea. The implementation was reasonably good. The go-to-market strategy was okay. We really kind of missed out on timing. Yeah. So we had built the company properly. We planned to go raise venture money, and we just showed up at the wrong time. Yeah. Effectively, right when the dot-com crash happened was when we were planning to go raise money. So we showed up at the wrong time. Now I'm 10 or 12 years older. This is my 5th startup I'm on with Rival IQ. A lot smarter, and having also surrounded myself with lots of other smart people in Seattle. lots of other companies that come through Techstars or Startup Weekends. So with a lot more experience, I think we're doing a lot differently now. But some of that failure and success and resetting what success looks like, I think that is something that goes into software startups, because effectively every sprint is what are we going to try to achieve, who's going to do why will that be good or bad, and then 60%, 70%, 80%, 90% of the sprint you actually achieve, and then you sort of reset it again. And the people who can both set the appropriate level of goal, because if you're only achieving at 20%, the goal's too hard. If you're achieving at 100%, the goal's too easy, and probably someone else is setting the goal a little bit higher. And so that process, I think, is really important, and building the rhythm in the team that it's okay to fail a little bit. It's okay for individuals to fail here and there. The team has to sort of pull everybody up together, and the team also has to push everyone to keep setting their own individual goals and the collective goals a little higher kind of every sprint you put together.
It's a really mature culture for a startup to have, that sort of level of discipline and willingness to set audacious goals. Why? How were you able to move on from that first kind of bigger failure after you raised money from friends and family with HelpShare, and that venture ended up ultimately not succeeding the way you initially saw it succeeding? How did you get that fortitude to try again, as opposed to, I'm sure you had many offers to go work for large companies and stay with a safe, secure salary for life and grow within an organization versus venture out again and go after it?
Yeah. So it took a long time. So when HelpShare failed and my wife finally said, dude, you need to get a job. We had spent all of our savings. We had done like many first-time entrepreneurs do, is we had extended the company too long. We had continued to say, maybe if it might happen, far too long. And I founded that company with my brother. So, both of our families who are close, we all sort of overextended ourselves, certainly financially and absolutely emotionally.
Yeah.
So we needed time to recharge. And I think for all of us who are entrepreneurs, you wrap a lot of your own personal self-worth into your company, into the success of your company. It's all you talk about, just all you talk about with your friends or your family. That's your life, and that's fine. But then when that thing fails, it's a really hard fall.
Yeah.
So I ended up at Microsoft, and I didn't plan to go to Microsoft, but one thing led to another. I ended up in a job at Microsoft, and I worked there for about 3 years. And I'd say the whole first year, which was very overwhelming for me, I'd never really worked in a big software company, but I learned a tremendous amount. That not only was quite good, relative to a startup from a financial perspective, like, oh wow, a paycheck, like that's a good thing. So I could recharge financially, I could recharge emotionally, and I could recharge almost intellectually, where I was learning all these other things which were different than what you need to learn in a startup. So how do you build big software? What do you do when you have hundreds of millions of users? What do you do when you're in 123 languages? How do you think about quality assurance? All these how do you sell enterprise software? All those things were different than what I had learned at HelpShare. But the process while I was at Microsoft, I was doing my own innovations. I was building new businesses around the core Exchange product, which is the one I worked on. I was thinking about new international markets. And my manager there and the people who ran Exchange at the time were quite supportive of that effort. And I was good at it, and I was learning a lot. So I was sort of staying entrepreneurial within the constructs of a big company and a big software product. And one thing led to another, and that's how I actually started the next company. Was I built a program. I worked with a couple other guys there that built a program to deal with venture capitalists. So we would go to VCs and we would say, this is Exchange. It has 125 million users and all over the world. And these are the areas where we see opportunity that we're not building something in the product for a variety of reasons. It's too geographic specific or it's too vertically specific for a variety of reasons. If you have companies like that, bring them our way and we'll introduce them to customers, because as long as they build something that's related to Exchange, of course. So that was a really nice dialogue between a big company and a big product and venture capitalists. So we gave them visibility in where we're going, and they gave us visibility, and they oftentimes introduced us to startups we ended up buying. Lots of startups we ended up sort of partnering with, And we could help small startups figure out how you would scale, because you can't go from being a small startup and then go address the whole Exchange base or the Office base, the Windows base, or anything like that. So we could help them in a lot of ways. So I was getting a little bit of my mentoring itch scratched there.
Yeah.
I was getting a little bit of my, how do I start a company? How do I identify a market? How do I identify a go-to-market? How do I identify a starting point, which is very small for most startups? And I was getting a lot of that, and one thing led to another, and I was invited by one of the VCs that we work with to become an entrepreneur in residence. And so he asked me, well, that was really fun doing that last company. Why don't you come and start another company here? And that's how I ended up leaving Microsoft.
That's a really interesting story, and it's something that I hear a lot of entrepreneurs talk about is how they originally got that initial idea, and they realize pain point not currently being solved by something that I'm finding, and then they get down a certain path and they finally go to market and they realize, oh, there actually are companies out there doing something around what I'm doing. And actually, when I first met you, I think it was Shane Mack who introduced us. Shane and I had met in Omaha, Nebraska back in 2010, and I think he introduced us at some rooftop bar where Ashton Kutcher was, and you kind of gave me your philosophy on personal networking and building networks, building social networks, and you had just started working at GIST at the time. Talk about all you can talk about is the thing that you're working on at the time. You were 100% invested and made a believer out of me in the product you were building and the philosophy of how to build networks. And so I guess one of the things I'm curious about with GIST, there were a lot of companies kind of in that space, right? Looking for a place in the Salesforce app store and building independent products, whether it's Reportive or Zobni or Plaxo. How did you go about starting that company, knowing that there were other companies out there doing similar kinds of things to GIST? Did you do any sort of competitive analysis?
Yeah, well, we started GIST, we started working on GIST in 2007. Mm-hmm. So this is sort of early days of Facebook becoming available for normal people who were in college, right? And this is the early days of Twitter just getting started. So the social networking, at least this phase of it, right? This is post MySpace, yet in terms of Facebook and or Twitter, just starting. So we started GIST actually with a slightly different premise in mind. So when we started GIST, we were really trying to say, how could we build a system that would bring me relevant news?
Yeah.
And our hypothesis was, well, what is relevant news, and how would I get something to sort of train the system? And we did a bunch of different prototypes on data sources and then how I might train the system. And the one that had the best sort of yield for us was connect to the inbox, find all the people and companies that matter to me based on how many emails I get from them or how many emails I send to them, simple prototype. Then go and hit the Google News API and bring me back a bunch of news. And you're like, wow, that's really cool. And that's a little bit like Noozle is today, or Nuzzle, or both of those are similar kinds of concepts, albeit 3 or 4 years behind GIST. So the first sort of prototype for GIST was really about finding me news about people I cared about. Mm. And then news at that point, we started to broaden a little bit. So there's content about someone, which is news, and then there's content by someone, which would be social network or social networking content. And so in order to find that, we had to do a little bit of our own, like, well, if I know that this is Matt Hunkler and this is his email address, at the time, Twitter gave us an API to do a lookup of a Twitter handle matching an email address, which is not currently available anymore. But that immediately said, oh, now I can get content by you and content about you. And on the back of that, it really started to evolve on being really a contact manager or a relationship manager, which is if I now have all of my contacts in one place and I can get news about them and the system can go and discover their social handles, which bring me content by them, I can use that to really understand them. And by understanding them, I can build better relationships with them. I can understand what you care about, where you're being written about, what you're posting about, and that helps me build a stronger relationship with you. And that's particularly applicable for entrepreneurs or salespeople or marketing people or business development people. And so that was really the evolution of how GIST came from really sort of a news or content discovery engine into being much more of a personal relationship manager or evolve social address book.
I mean, obviously a pioneer in that whole space, which has just exploded now. I can't even imagine how many companies that sort of play in that space. I'm sure there's a Brian Solis infographic somewhere that covers all of those different kinds of companies that are out there right now.
Well, I'd say we're on wave 2 of that.
Yeah.
So, wave 1 was Gist and Reportive and Zobni, and I mean, all those companies are gone. I mean, they're acquired, or LinkedIn bought Reportive, and Yahoo bought Zobni, and BlackBerry bought Gist, and so they're all gone.
Yeah.
And yet the problem still exists, and the problem can be defined in a couple of different categories. One is just contact management. So where are all my contacts, and are they all up to date, and they're all deduped, and do they have the right phone numbers and stuff? That's contact management. Then there's social contact management, which is more in the Gist sort of sense. And then there's sort of this networking or CRM kind of space.
Yep.
So I'm actually now on the board of a company called Full Contact.
Yeah.
And Full Contact is first trying to solve the contact management problem. Are all my contacts up to date, deduped, normalized, and on my phone and on my desktop and in my web browser and inside Gmail? And it's pretty damn good for that.
Yeah.
And yet they've started now this sort of next wave, which is socially enhancing them. Oh, well, here's a person that's sitting in Gmail that is an email address. Oh, that's their picture. Oh, there's their LinkedIn. Oh, there's their Twitter. There's their company, and there's their last 5 tweets. So that's super valuable. And so in many ways, I'm putting my effort behind, I would say, the next wave of social contact managers or social CRM tools, and Full Contact, I think, is going to be a real leader in that space.
So obviously this makes sense in terms of the role of salesperson for Entrepreneur. And maybe if they're out there doing some fundraising, what would you have to say to someone who says, I don't have time to go out and network, I'm too busy building a product as an entrepreneur?
Well, I'm going to argue that the success in business is directly correlated to the size and strength of your professional network.
Yeah.
And I've said that many times over, and I said it through Gist. So think of it both in terms of size and strength.
Yeah.
So a lot of people are just like, I want to collect a lot of contacts and connect with a lot of people on LinkedIn. Your strength of connection is not very good there. It's the beginning, at least you have them as a contact. So size and strength. And the stronger a relationship is, the more likely someone is going to A, do something for you, or recommend you or your product to somebody else. So when you think about this in terms of size and strength of network, you can think about it from a recruiting perspective. To go and grow a big company, you got to recruit great people. And you at least certainly have to know them as one degree of connection, but really you're looking for the second or third order connections that ultimately people say like, oh, I've heard about that TA guy from my friend Matt, and I really like Matt, and Matt really likes TA, so therefore TA must be okay.
Yeah.
And that kind of thing, so extending your network from a recruiting perspective. The second category is extending your network from what I would call influencers. So no matter what software company you're building, there are influencers, or even really any company. Now there are influencers, primarily online influencers, who will drive that conversation. You need to find a way to build a relationship with those people. The way you build a relationship is first identify, then figure out what they care about, then figure out how to sort of amplify or add value to what they're doing, whether you're amplifying their content, giving them ideas. And oftentimes, if they care about your space, then they're going to be really interested in people building new solutions in that space. Your perspective as an entrepreneur on why there needs to be a solution. Why is your take unique or different than someone else's? And so you build this relationship with the key influencers, and they will be an important part of both the product development cycle, because they're telling you, hey, have you heard of this solution or that solution, or this company's trying it this way, or that other company's trying it that way, and or in your marketing and customer acquisition, because they're the ones that are saying, hey, have you heard about Full Contact? Oh my God, it's amazing, you have to go try it. And that is a customer acquisition strategy. And clearly in the fundraising category, understanding and building relationships with investors is an important thing to do. And you do that in the same way, which is understanding who they are, understanding what they care about, and being able to build a relationship before you need to raise the money.
Yeah.
You need to ask for advice before you ask for money. And so if you're building this relationship where you're asking for advice, and the best investors will know the space very well. Mm-hmm. They will have invested in that space before. They'll know most companies because every good other entrepreneurs called them up and said, hey, Brad Feld, I'd really like for you to invest in my company. Because you invested in Gist, I want you to invest in my company. Because you're an investor in Full Contact, I want you to invest in my company. And Brad would be able to then say, have you heard about A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, and I? And you're like, wow, no, I haven't. Or all the companies who tried to solve this problem in the past. So all of those are different categories of people. So your team, your investors, your influencers, key marketers are all ways that you want to build a relationship. And the stronger those relationships are, which is a frequency and a strength of the conversation, the more likely they are to proactively do something for you, or certainly just be there to say like, oh yeah, that company's pretty cool, they're doing something interesting.
Is there a recent example that you can think of where a contact turned into a relationship and that resulted directly in a new hire or a new customer or some new funding?
I would say I can give you an example of all of them.
Yeah, sure. What's your favorite one from the last year?
Well, we just hired, so customer success, you may have heard that term, and a lot of companies, once they'll get sort of a little bit of product market fit, they start to get some paying customers. I recommend that the CEO does all of the early selling of the product, all of the early customer support, all of the early customer engagement, because they learn so much about what's working, what's not working. So once you maybe get to, Rival IQ is a B2B kind of company. So once we hit sort of around 100, 150 paying customers, we started to individually not be able to scale, but also wanting to sort of productize the customer engagement, customer support. So who did we hire? The guy who did customer success for me at Gist.
Nice.
And after Gist was acquired, he went to desk.com and he did customer success for Desk, and 3 months later it was acquired. So Greg had 2 acquisitions in 3 months period of time, all around the customer success category. And Greg and I have maintained good, strong relationships throughout the time when I was doing, when I was at BlackBerry, he was at Salesforce. And when we wanted to start scaling here, it wasn't like I called him up and said, hey, Greg, I want to hire you tomorrow. It's like, Greg, I want to show you what we're doing with our product. This was like 6 months ago. I want to know how you might think about scaling a customer success organization. I want to share tools back and forth. Greg's also a productivity geek, as I am, and so we share lots of tools back and forth. And so I was building the relationship where I'm exchanging value, sharing tools, sharing connections. He would call me oftentimes for advice on things he was working on. And then when we were ready and when he was ready, we were able to hire him back here at Rival IQ. So he now leads customer success for Rival IQ.
That's awesome. And I don't want to completely jump over the acquisition by BlackBerry, so maybe there's another time we can schedule another call and get specifically. I'm sure there's tons of lessons in that particular acquisition, but I want to make sure we have time to talk about what you're doing right now with Rival IQ, which of course I'm a customer of Rival IQ. We have some local investors here in Indiana that are invested in Rival IQ, and it seems like it's just the best tool out there right now for doing any sort of competitive intelligence or competitive research, and really just staying on top of the game in terms of content marketing. What is sort of the grand vision of where you're going with that company? And let's start with that question.
Yeah, so I mean, we started with the premise that digital marketing is a very challenging thing today. Marketers are overwhelmed with the choices that they have and choices on what channel they care about. And when they even choose their channels, trying to figure out, like, how am I doing? Am I doing a good job? What is a good job? And so that problem we started on was marketers who are faced with many different choices on where they spend their time and where they spend their money. And we started with a hypothesis that, well, a way to answer that question is to compare yourself to other companies, and certainly compare yourself to your competitors. So we wanted to build a product which would make it very easy for someone to say, I'm abc.com, and I want to compare myself to 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 other people who are doing something similar to me. And I want to be able to compare myself from a web presence, from a search presence, and from a social presence. And that's what Rival IQ does. In the short term, I mean, that's what it does today, and it does that very well, as you know, as a customer. It does it very quickly. So within sort of 10 or 15 minutes, man, you've got a pretty good understanding of who's leading the conversation on what channel and what content is resonating with people who want to buy X, Y, Z. And that's very powerful, and we monitor that on an ongoing basis. The longer term sort of vision for Rival IQ is, how do we continue to help you make the right decisions? So let's say that you're a marketer or a startup, and you say, well, you know, I only have one guy in marketing, or I'm doing the marketing. I can't choose to market on all the different channels. So all I'm going to focus on is a couple of keywords and Twitter, or a couple of keywords and LinkedIn, or a couple of keywords and LinkedIn and Twitter, and that's all I'm going to do.
Is that what you would recommend to most entrepreneurs?
Yeah, generally. I mean, it varies a little bit depending on what kind of company you're doing, right? B2C versus B2B.
Sure.
But let's just say that for sure, almost every company is going to have to do a decent job on SEO and organic search.
Yep.
Right. So you got to figure out, well, I got to start producing content. Well, what kind of content should I produce? Well, let me go find the top ranking content from my competitors, and that gives me at least a good indication.
Yep.
And how much of that content? Do I need 1 post a week or 3 posts a week? What do I need? So that's the first sort of thing, which is organic search.
Yep.
The next is probably 2 channels, probably Twitter and Facebook, or Twitter and LinkedIn, probably. But sort of my opinion is almost less relevant than what Rival IQ will tell you. Go put in 5 competitors and it'll tell you exactly what channels matter, how big the audiences are, how often your competitors post, and which of their posts is getting lots of engagement. So for the entrepreneur, once they can easily understand what channels matter, what post frequency is sort of required to at least play along, and what kind of content is resonating really well. And that process, whether you're a startup of 2 guys, or you're IBM or Oracle or General Mills or Ford or Audi or Coke, you have the exact same set of questions. What channels matter? What post frequency do I need? And what content is resonating with my consumer? And that problem will never go away. It will only be more channels and more complexity. And being able to understand your competitors' strategies is a pretty big advantage. And you can do that for a relatively inexpensive sort of monthly fee.
So I know sometimes it makes sense to do what all the competitors are doing because maybe they've spent more time in R&D and they've spent some more time, trying different channels and figuring out which ones work for them.
Yeah.
Do you usually recommend, in terms of a general best practice, that entrepreneurs go to the channels where their competitors currently are, or go to channels that are currently being utilized by their competitors and dominate in that area?
So that depends a little bit on the skill and interest of the company. So to the extent that you're a founder and you're like, you know what, I'm really interested in marketing and customer acquisition as a functional skill.
Yeah.
And in that particular case, you might say, okay, I can quickly see that my competitors are here, here, and here, but none of them are playing around on Instagram or Vine or Pinterest or Snapchat or whatever. And those are areas which have not yet been sort of commoditized and optimized. So if it were me recommended, I would say probably it's an 80-20 rule. Like 80% of your effort probably has to be in support of the normal channels because all those other guys have already built a customer base there.
Yeah.
So if you're not there, then you're missing out. So you have to sort of do enough to play along. And then 20% is experimentation. Like let's try something different. But that experimentation is important to keep in balance with the other sorts of things in terms of customer acquisition. And that doesn't mean just digital customer acquisition, but other forms of customer acquisition.
Yeah.
So 80-20 type of rule, I would say there.
Yeah, that's really good feedback, thinking about what's going to get the most bang for your buck in terms of investment of time.
Now, one thing that's interesting using Rival IQ again is to set up 2 landscapes. So a landscape is what we call a collection of companies. So one is your competitive landscape. Then build what we call a comparative landscape. So pick 10 companies that you think are awesome at marketing to your consumer that may not be your competitor. So say, for example, like we are in the space where we sell digital analytics or digital marketing tools. We look at a company like HubSpot or Buffer, and those guys are incredibly good online marketers. They're not our competition. So we have a landscape that would include HubSpot and Buffer and Moz. And we go and analyze what are those guys doing that we can learn from. And so we go back and forth between our direct competitors and our comparative things. Now you can think about comparison in terms of audience, like who markets to my same audience, or in terms of channel. So who's really awesome at Twitter, who markets to B2B, or in terms of their strategy. So who's got a good blend of this and that. And by doing a little bit of research, and we're starting to do this at Rival IQ, so we're analyzing our entire database of 40,000 companies now, and trying to pull out who is the best B2B marketer on Twitter.
Wow.
Based on engagement rate. So how much of their audience can they engage on a regular basis? That's our best metric for good. And in that sense, who are the best? And what do they do? And how often do they post? And how often do they repost the same content over and over and over again? Because on average, your content will only be seen by 5% of your Twitter following when it goes out. So you have to repost it. So that's like a beginning of a best practice that we will be able to derive by managing tens of thousands of companies. And that's the bit more of the long-term vision of Rival IQ is if we come in and you say, here's me, here's my 5 competitors, we can say, here's 5 companies you should compare to, and here's what you should do differently to go win in your marketing.
Oh, that's great.
Spend time here, increase your post rate, sponsor these posts, cross-post these, do this, write more content that looks like that, and we will be able to do that in a very data-driven way that is incredibly personal for every single company.
Yeah, I think that the relevance of the platform is what strikes me the most, and that's some really good feedback too for me. I realize I have my competitive and comparative all in one landscape, so just the idea of splitting those two up is something I'm going to do today. Well, more likely late tonight, but that's a really good tip. But also looking at sort of some of those best practices that you're doing. What are some of the others that you've seen successful entrepreneurs do when it comes to social and content? Like if you were going to give one of the best things an entrepreneur could do and implement today or late tonight to really take their social and content to the next level?
Yeah, so I'm going to sort of gear this initially toward sort of the very small, sort of the 2 of us in the garage kind of level, is that we have to pick a couple of keywords that matter to us. Mm-hmm. So what does TA want to be known as and for, and what does Rival IQ want to be known for? So let's say we ended up with 2 or 3 keywords, right? I'm a sailor, and I'm an entrepreneur, I'm an advisor, I'm an investor, and Rival IQ is about competitive intelligence and marketing analytics, okay? So those are sort of our baseline keywords that we care about. Then I would say, okay, now I'm going to go and find the key influencers about each one of those particular keywords. Relatively simple to do on Rival IQ. Our Twitter mentions feature, follower wonk is another good way to do this. Just a Twitter search is a reasonably good way to do this. Okay, now I know 5 or 10 people who are influential about any one of those particular keywords. Mm-hmm. So I've got really effectively 25 to 30 important Twitter people that I need to care about. Yeah. Okay, now I've got a stream, I build those into a Twitter list. Now I've got a stream of content which is relevant to the keywords that I care about, which I want to assume myself and my brand about. Now I get into what I call the T.A. McCann 532 social media rule. For every 10 posts that I make, whether it be Twitter or Facebook, and I'm primarily a Twitter, LinkedIn person, mm-hmm. because I'm more of a B2B guy. I'm more building mostly B2B software companies, and so I care about those channels are my most important channels. If you're more B2C, then you probably want Twitter and Facebook, or Twitter and Facebook and Instagram, but let's say you're B2B like me. Yeah. So for every 10 posts, 5 of them should be about the space, generally by somebody else. Mm-hmm. All the stuff that the influencers are posting. Like they're already telling me all the good stuff. All I'm doing is retweeting that stuff to my audience. I'm amplifying it. Every now and again, I might send a direct message back to one of those guys or message them like, at Matt Hunkler, awesome post about whatever, and then a link to your thing. So you're seeing that I'm paying attention to you, even though I'm small and insignificant at this point in time. So I'm building my content and I'm building my audience around a particular set of keywords, and I'm slowly building a relationship. Mm-hmm. That's the 5 of my 10, so half of my content. The next is 3 of the next 3 posts are about my perspective on that space. What do I think is broken? What do I think needs improvement? Can initially be just sort of tweets and posts, but then it should become slightly longer form. This is where your blog starts, which is, this is my perspective on why contact management needs a feature like ABC, and why hasn't anyone solved this yet? Oh, by the way, we're working on it. That type of thing. And then more personal. We all are humans. We all have unique things, and personal can be as simple as like, hey, looking forward to my trip in Las Vegas, just had a great interview with Matt Hunkler, those types of things, which are personal but more in a business sense. Yeah. Or congratulations to so-and-so friend who did such and such, generally in line with whatever you're trying to do from a business perspective. That's the social 532 rule that I kind of came up with a few years ago.
That's great.
And that gives you this blend of, I'm a human, I have like regular things that happen with me too, but you don't want to hear all about that part of me. Yeah. I also have a perspective on the things that I'm doing, and I know, and I'm now getting much, much smarter about the thing that I'm trying to do. And if you just practice that, you'll slowly build relationships with the influencers. Because you have a perspective, you'll have something to share with those influencers. And the blend of your own perspective with the influential perspective, with the fact that you're an interesting, you've got like a life too, allows you to build relationships with people who might be interested in sailing as much as they are as travel in Seattle, as much as they are in software startups or productivity tools or startup weekends or all of that sort of stuff.
I think that's an interesting perspective in and of itself. And so I appreciate you sharing that particular tip. I know I'll be going back through my feeds to see exactly where my ratio falls in terms of...
And it's a rule of thumb, right?
Sure.
You probably won't get to for every 10, but it's more about that blend of amplifying the thought leaders, creating your own thought leadership, and then being a real human.
Yeah. Well, it seems like those kinds of things can definitely lead to things like partnerships, things like investments, and even things in terms of mergers and acquisitions, in terms of the life cycle of your own company. So I could ask you questions all day, whether it's sailing or startups or software, and I know you've got great answers. In fact, I think we even spent half a day together last time we got together in person, and I really enjoyed that chat. So I appreciate you giving the time today, TA, and thanks for being here.
Absolutely.
If people want to find out more about Rival IQ, where should they go?
It's rivaliq.com, and from an entrepreneurship perspective, my blog has a lot of good things on it. Yes. So that's tamccann.com, all one word. And to the extent that we didn't get to acquisitions, but to the extent that any of your listeners get into a place where they're really seriously looking at another big company acquiring them, feel free to send me email and I can give you, it's so rare, but to the extent that you get there and I can be helpful, just send me email and I'll give you whatever advice I can.
That's great. That's really generous of you. And we'll link that up below here on YouTube and then also on the Verge blog as well. So thanks again.
Awesome. You're welcome.
Like that interview? Give us a like below, hit subscribe, and just go ahead and click the link. You can subscribe to all of the interviews that we've done from the past, whether it's Mark Cuban or Tony Hsieh or some of the up-and-coming entrepreneurs. You can get all of that delivered directly to your inbox just by clicking the link below. Thanks.